This episode of the Disney Dish podcast is sponsored by TouringPlans.com, where you can find trip planning tools and advice for Walt Disney World, Disneyland, and Universal Studios Orlando. Disney Dish listeners can subscribe with discount code DISH2013. That's DISH2013 to get 25% off a one-year subscription to TouringPlans.com. Check it out as soon as you're done listening. Thanks! Welcome back to another edition of the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, your host, and with me today, as always, is Jim Hill through the magic of the interwebs. Jim, how's it going?
Not bad. As always, good to chat, Len.
It is definitely good. Jim, today we're going to talk about, I guess, an upcoming anniversary for Tokyo Disneyland?
Yep, we're coming up on the 30th. April 15th, to be exact, is when they kicked open the doors at the first international Disneyland. Though, if the Oriental Land Company had had its way, they would have had it up and running as early as the mid-1960s.
Really?
Yep, they actually initially approached the Walt Disney Company back in 1962. And,
7 years after Disneyland had opened?
And the interesting thing is that Walt, from basically within the first year Disneyland was open, there were people reaching out, asking Walt if he wanted to build another one on the East Coast, if he wanted to build one, in Australia, South America, so on and so forth.
You know what would work? I'm just throwing this out there. Paris. You're right. They'll never work. Never mind. So Disneyland opens up. And so people start coming in and say, "Hey, we would like you to clone this." What's the reaction inside the Disney company?
They're flattered, but again, this is during the Walt era of the company, and Walt was very hands-on, and more to the point, when you're talking about 62 or thereabouts, Walt's enthusiasm had changed from let's build a family fun park to this is during the point where Walt's attention is shifting more toward futuristic city. And I remember Walt is dead by December of 66, so during the 62 point or thereabouts, he's heavily into designing stuff for the 1964 World's Fair in New York. But he's also, deep into the site investigation for Walt Disney World. And at this point, they're still considering whether or not, instead of doing a giant resort type thing, Walt's exploring ideas like standalone attractions at Niagara Falls. In fact, they were having conversations with Seagram's about, depending on who you talk to in the company. One was that Disney wanted to build a version of Flight to the Moon because of course people were going to Niagara Falls for their honeymoon. So, but on the other hand, there's other folks who will tell you that it was more about taking the Circle Vision 360 and doing a film about the falls and the surrounding area, and doing that as an attraction. And at the same time, he's having conversations with that crazy billionaire who owns so much of RCA about building a city with a theme park down in Palm Beach. There's a lot of stuff going on. So when the Oriental Land Company came in and they had this old rail yard dump area that they wanted to put a park in, it's like, yeah. We'll put you in the pile of, hundreds of people who want our attention. But Oriental Land Company, they were very persistent. They kept coming back, and they kept coming back, and they kept coming back. And, Walt dies in 66. You have Walt Disney World Resort opens in 71. Mm-hmm. And now the Disney company, you jump ahead about 4 or 5 years. And
Mid-70s.
Mid-70s. And the Disney company realizes that, they've signed these deals with the state of Florida, that about the resort. And it all sort of keys off of the fact that they're going to build Epcot. They're going to build this city. They're going to build, this, which has factories and jobs. And Disney is still recovering from the hit that they took. Remember, Disney World opens in 71. In 73, we have the Arab oil embargo, and attendance drops at the resort. And it really shook Disney. Just sort of like, wow, that we didn't know we were that vulnerable to something as fluky as oil prices.
Yeah, well, more specifically, their entire theme park revenue at this point is entirely dependent on the American leisure market, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And if people can travel there. And so, it just, but at the same time, that the drumbeat begins. Where's Epcot? Where's Epcot? Where's Epcot? And it's like, how are we going to pay for this? Because, don't get me wrong, Disney World is making money, and but this is also during a period where Disney Studios can't make a hit film to save its life. It's all Apple Dumpling Gang or the Shaggy DA.
There's a tribute to the Apple Dumpling Gang in the new Big Thunder, so I
heard about this.
I consider it a success.
Well, yeah.
The movie lives on in our memory. What?
That's true. I so look forward to that Apple Dumpling Gang convention.
Exactly.
I'll hang out in that function room, and
I think we should do cosplay.
There we go. You can be Amos. All right. Anyway.
So Disney's looking at this, going, we need some money, and also we're very dependent on the U.S. leisure market. We need to diversify.
There we go.
And voila, as they say.
It's a twofer. Here's the Oriental Land Company that is, wants to build this park, and here's Disney needing a significant, amount of money to go forward with Epcot. And so it's a peanut butter and chocolate moment. It's like, okay, so
at this point, like 10 or 15 years had passed between the time that the Oriental Land Company first proposed something in like, let's say, the early 60s, and then it's like the mid 70s. Is it the same people at the Oriental Land Company?
Yeah. In fact, that's and this then became very much of an education process with Disney, because, in fact, I remember talking with John Hench about this, that that when it became time to do the actual negotiations, they had this kind of embarrassing conversation where it's like, where are our old Imagineers? Where are somewhat gray-haired people? Because again, it's like they found that when these Japanese business executives, gentlemen in their late 50s, early 60s, were in a room full of crazy 20 and 30-year-olds, who were pitching rides and that sort of thing. The meeting didn't go all that well. They didn't take what the younger people were saying or were trying to sell to them seriously.
Yeah, there's a whole cultural thing, right? Yeah,
that's it exactly. So,
yeah.
But they found that if they took a John Hench or somebody like that who had a little more gray hair and spoke a little bit more slowly and that sort of thing, they could close the deal that much faster. But again, remember, this is. Again, the Oriental Land Company pursued Disney since 62, but when it started 75, 76, when they started getting serious about this and exploring different ideas, suddenly the negotiation began to slow down because now it's a Japanese negotiation. And,
right.
It's formal business meetings and pitches and let us go off and consider this for 6 weeks and get back to you. And it took them till 79 4 years to finally close this deal. And even then it was, I know guys who worked in the project, and just what was fascinating is that they would design new things for the Japanese, and the Japanese would come back and say, no, we want that. We want, for example, they'd point to Cinderella Castle and said, we want that. It's like, well, but we could give you your own special castle. We want that. And it then became kind of difficult because, for example, the Japanese would come stateside and walk, visit Disneyland and Disney World and say, okay, we want Disney World's castle, but we want Disneyland's version of Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so how do we fit that in? And in fact, it's interesting that that's been a problem since day one with Pirates of the Caribbean for Tokyo, because the Oriental Land insisted on the exact building front that it has in California. Pirates in Tokyo has never done the business that any of the stateside versions of the attraction does, because
really,
well, frankly, the outside of the building doesn't communicate pirates. It's like, okay, interesting looking building, and people breeze, the Japanese breeze right by it.
It's the Monsters Inc. problem in Tomorrowland.
That's exactly. There's just nothing about this Federalist building that says, by the way, there's a boat right in there. You go down a waterfall, you battle with pirates.
It's famous. You'll love it. Yeah.
Yeah, get in. And
huh.
But that was the thing. That was the challenge. And in fact, jumping ahead a little bit with their history, when it came time, and Tokyo Disneyland was a success right out of the box. I mean, it was, and in fact, it's one of those things where the Disneyland and Disney, where people just stand back and just envy both the attendance levels, or more to the point, the retail. There's a whole sector of the Japanese public that in the house they're referred to as the Japanese shop girls, the secretaries, that sort of thing. These are the young women who come to the park, who come once a week. They buy the annual pass, but they come to shop.
Really?
In fact, I mean, if you're let's put it this way: if you're not a fan of Duffy the Bear at the Disney theme parks, you have nobody to blame but the young Japanese
women. Good to know.
Because when Duffy was introduced to the park, it became a sensation, and they found that they could sell, different holiday Duffys. They could sell outfits for Duffys, and these girls just could not get enough of Duffy.
Sure, it's their Build-A-Bear.
Yeah, so and that was the thing of, well, let's bring it stateside, and let's remember the first attempt at rolling Duffy out at California Adventure and at Disney was a colossal flop. They had to come back and try to make this character that much more accessible for the American public. But yeah, it just, the financial model for that park right off the bat just sort of floored Disney. And in fact, it was Eisner spent many days grumbling and growling about how, because the Japanese had ground Disney down so badly during the 4-year-long negotiation, the financial terms wound up being so in the Japanese's favor, because Disney was over a barrel needing the money to proceed with Epcot, that Disney, for example, only got 10 cents on every admission. Every dollar spent on admission going into the park.
Really, 10%? That's terrible.
And then 15% of retail.
Wow.
But at the same time, Disney thought, well, if this doesn't succeed, we want to, they wanted the big upfront cash payment for Epcot.
Oh, so that's what they got. So they got upfront cash on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the end, it was one of these situations where it turned out to be such a success from the get-go. In fact, honestly, when you drill down into the deal for Euro Disney, when you drill down into the Shanghai and the Hong Kong deal, the terms for those parks are a direct result of the fact that Eisner and the folks that followed felt that Disney got hosed for Tokyo. But the card walkers of the world, they weren't, they just wanted to sort of make it, send it over there, let them run it. I mean, and of course the irony is that they trained the Japanese how to run the Disney theme parks, but they trained them in the style of Disney of the 1970s, which they embraced like a religion. In fact, that's, if you go over now to, I mean, you've been to the two Japanese parks, correct?
I've not been. Oh. We were going to go the year of the earthquake in nuclear leak, and so it's hard to convince. It's hard to convince Hannah's mom to let the 14-year-old go over there.
I cannot understand why, but yeah,
it's strange.
But no, it's this beautifully maintained park that is pristinely clean, and with cast members who are just so protective of their attractions that those who come over and then go to a stateside park are like, wait a minute,
this filth. What is this?
Yeah,
we're looking to go over. Maybe this year if it gets slow. So let's go back to right before the opening, or even before the opening, because it opened in '83, right?
Yep.
So they're doing these negotiations in the late '70s. What sort of lands do the Japanese want, and more specifically, what sort of cultural changes do they have to make to the attractions for opening day? I mean, do we still have Americans running around in the frontier, like in Paris, right? The French are obsessed with the American West. What are sort of the things that are the same? What are the things that are different on opening day with Tokyo Disneyland?
Well, for one, given that this was going to be built down by Tokyo Bay, they believed right off the bat that their entrance complex was going to have to be different. And there was, in fact, one fascinating kind of iteration of it where basically the entrance of the park was kind of a larger, flatter version of the Contemporary Hotel. I mean, you walked into this giant A-frame sort of space.
I totally see that in Japan. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but that was the thing. They showed it to the Oriental Land Company executives. It's like, no, we want Main Street. I mean, we get some wonderful design, but we want Main Street. And so Disney figured, well, all right, so we do Main Street only. We do Main Street by way of the Crystal Palace from the great London Exposition. So you have, these streets that are covered with a giant sort of lattice of glass and metal. And it's kind of clunky, but on the other hand, it does its job. It keeps you out of the weather. It keeps you, and you still have your beauty shot of standing on Main Street looking at the castle in the distance. But at the same time, it was always fascinating to watch how Disney kept trying to sort of shoehorn, to bend the Japanese to their will. I mean, for example, of course, as part of this negotiation, Disney was looking for somebody to step up and sponsor the Japanese pavilion for Epcot, and they did, sort of backdoor deals for that. But one of the ways they convinced the people to do that is like, okay, we'll take the money that we're going to spend to develop a Japanese-centric attraction for Epcot, and we'll put that same attraction in the sort of the Tomorrowland section, and this was the Meet the World attraction, which was kind of a carousel of progress take on the history of Japan, which was, in fact, that's the interesting thing. If you go backstage at Epcot, behind the Japanese pavilion, there's this giant building just behind that sort of gallery space.
It's huge.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because that's where this attraction was supposed to go, and it was only in the latter. In fact, it got bumped out that attraction to sort of phase 2 of Epcot, and then ultimately never got built because once they opened Tokyo Disneyland and Americans began to get over and do the Meet the World attraction, they would get off it, and it's like, it's very attractive, and I enjoy the talking stork, but kind of interesting how you stepped around the whole World War II thing.
Yeah. You'll notice on the American Adventure, that's exactly where FDR's speech cuts off when you start naming the people that were on the other side of World War II.
There you go. No, and in fact, that's again, that kind of interesting that. In fact, it was the Japanese, as part of the Epcot negotiation, that insisted, well, all right, if we're going into Epcot, we need to be next to America. So it's, you can't think about it.
Awkward.
Yeah. So
now the history of the 20th century goes invention of the automobile, stock market crash, Great Depression, Elvis.
There we go.
There's this whole section
of keep moving.
Nothing to see here. Yeah.
But yeah, that in the end they realized that opening an attraction that kind of steps over World War II in a place where all of our World War II veterans have gone to retire, probably not a good idea. So that never got built. But they.
So in Tokyo Disneyland, did they do anything different with the theming of, like, Main Street? Obviously, I guess it's the American Main Street.
Yeah, it's
interesting.
Turn of the century America. In fact, that persisted all the way through to Shanghai.
Wow.
And in fact, Shanghai is going to be the first park that deliberately steps away from any Western areas, so whether it's Main Street USA or it's Frontierland. That in fact, it's been kind of interesting to watch with Shanghai, with Hong Kong, how that park deliberately didn't open with an American West theme section, but as part of their most recent expansion, we suddenly have Grizzly Gulch, which is, finally, here's the American West.
There you go.
So, anyway, back to Tokyo Disneyland.
So Tokyo they had a Main Street. Did they have an Adventureland?
Yes, but at the same time, it gets kind of interesting because, face it, this is, you're opening this park in '83, and by the time this happened, so many of the Disney rides have been ripped off by other amusement parks and theme parks around the world.
Oh, sure.
When they did the Jungle Cruise, a lot of the Japanese, kind of just made fun of it because it's like, geez, it's like a ripoff of Mara Land, which
that's great.
In fact, that's that's one of the more bizarre parts of this story is that there was one of the reasons this took as long as it did is there was a park called Nara Dreamland that opened in '61 in Japan, and this was so obviously a ripoff of Disneyland. I mean, it was just like their castle, their Frontierland. I mean, if you trust me, if you go and Google Nara Dreamland, they didn't even pretend. I mean, you enter the park by going by the Disneyland train station. It's an exact replica of the Disneyland train station. And then you walk down a knockoff of Main Street USA, and there's a castle at the end of their Main Street.
The concept of intellectual property back in the 60s was not yet fully formed, Jim.
This was so naked. I mean, it's like, again, next to the castle is this, this knockoff, about a third of the size of the Matterhorn. I mean, it just is so there, and that was one of the things that Disney was very concerned about. It's like, well, why, how are we going to protect ourselves intellectually here? And our rights, and eventually Oriental Land Company is like, look, you're just going to have to trust us. And as it turns out, it was a good call. That they've, though it's been an interesting relationship when they decided that they wanted to do the park next door. This was finally Michael Eisner was in charge, and. So we're talking about, and the thing that Disney had just opened at that point was Disney MGM Studios.
Mm.
And so they spent upwards of $50 or $60 million developing a studio park that would go right next door to,
Tokyo.
to Tokyo Disneyland, and, made the pitch, made the presentation, and the Oriental Land executives were, this is very nice. We appreciate this. We're not building this. Because their belief was that the Japanese people are not all that interested in how movies are made, and
sure.
and it's kind of interesting because that's kind of an issue that Universal Studios Osaka has come up against. That they had to go back in and sort of retool that park as well to sort of step away from the stuff that talks about the process and just entertain. But then when it came time to do Tokyo DisneySeas, what they kept getting the vibe in every meeting that they just basically want us to make Tokyo Disneyland again.
So how did the idea of a seas-based park?
Well, that sort of, and again, it was they came back to the Japanese and said, "Look, you're an island. It's like you're surrounded by water. So that it's in your nation's DNA to look to the sea for adventure and and for food and why don't we do a park that celebrates that, but at the same time make it."
There's a whaling exhibit. No, wait, no, there's not. Because that would be wrong, Jim. Wrong.
That's right. Here's your little stick. Go beat that dolphin.
Oh God!
It became this weird. That they would have these conversations with the Japanese about, all right, you want this park to have a small world type ride because that's very popular at your park. It's like, okay. Well, here's our Sinbad ride. It uses boats. It has teeny tiny half-size figures in multi-dimensional sets, and themed for around. That's how they had to go through the entire park, selling individual pieces as this is that over at Tokyo Disneyland. For example, Mount Prometheus. They sold them on the point. It's like, look, it's the castle. All right, it's made of concrete. It's large. It comes to a point at the top. And we do fireworks over it.
It has all the characteristics of a castle.
And that's it was one of these things where the guys who worked on the project said it was the most bizarre negotiation because it was like they wouldn't say that we want Disneyland, Tokyo Disneyland again, they would just, you'd have this meeting where you'd talk in circles around what it was, and then eventually have to sell them on this point. It's like, all right, it's the same, only different. And of course, the irony of that is, if you know your Disney history, what ends up happening is that the icon for this park, in fact, there's one of the very last photos that was taken of Frank Wells before his tragic death, is Frank in front of, the model for Tokyo DisneySea, where the icon for that park was the lighthouse at Alexandria.
Right.
Which, of course...
Yeah, ended up at the Universal Studios, but whatever. It's,
That happened.
So they along with Tokyo DisneySea and Tokyo Disneyland, I've heard that the hotels over in Tokyo are some of the most amazing hotels in any Disney property anywhere. How do those get built? Does the Oriental Land Company own those as well, or do they bring somebody in?
No. That's that was one of the more interesting aspects of the project. In fact, that was one of the only successes right off the bat from, if you remember, the opening of Disneyland Paris, that you came under the Disneyland hotel,
which is it's a beautiful hotel. It's on a much smaller scale than the U.S. hotels, and it's sort of like a Grand Floridian sort of feel to it. The other thing is that it's something for me to say this. I think it's expensive, Jim. I think it's expensive. So God, if I think it's expensive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually haven't stayed at that hotel because it's so expensive. Think about that.
Jeez.
I know, right? The Oriental Land Company decides to do a couple of. Were hotels always part of the original mix, even from opening day, or was it something that they added on?
Part of the problem was that Oriental Land Company, there were hotels on the periphery of the property, but they didn't own them outright. There were Hiltons and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And it just again, at this point, this is the Eisner era version of the Disney company, where they're making significant amounts of money off of the hotels, and
sure.
They go to the Oriental Land executives like, look, you should have some hotels of your own. More to the point, you should have, look at what we're making. And remember that one of the reasons they can make as much money as they do off of the Disneyland Paris Hotel is that it straddles the entrance of the park. In fact, people who pay, premium for that view of looking into the kingdom at night.
Yeah.
And that was the notion of, well, why do, Paris makes all this money off of one hotel that straddles its entrance. Why don't you have two? And literally, these are now the bookends that you enter that park through. That you have your Venetian theme to one side, and I want to say it's Renaissance Restoration on the other. But yeah, and with that borrow whole blocks of the New York section that you can look down to as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's very cleverly themed, but they again understanding that the Japanese are. In fact, this is kind of a sad part of the story, at least from a stateside point of view, is that because of the cultural differences, they can do things in the queues and attractions in Tokyo that just they can't do stateside. They can do propping that stops within 6 inches of the actual queue, because the Japanese have been taught to be that much more respectful of other people's property and that sort of thing. So they're not.
Wow. Oh, so it's much closer then.
Yeah. So factoring that into the hotels, there's painting and propping and design a level that you'll never see in a stateside park, because again, we're Americans. We reach out and go, well, what does that do? And it just, it came off in my hand. It's again one of these things where when the Oriental Land Company decided they were going to spend $3 billion on this, they insisted that the $3 billion be all up front. At places where people could see it. There wasn't back the house stuff. And it's a stunning park. It's a stunning resort. And it's been kind of interesting now to watch, when attractions travel over there, whether it's a Tower of Terror, where I remember talking with members of the design team, and one of the Japanese the Oriental Land executives came over. Oh, we love this ride. It's like, okay, cool. We're going to bring it over. And it's like, by the way, who's this Rod Serling guy?
There's some sort of like, was he still alive? Could we meet him?
Yeah, it's just like they had no idea who, the Twilight Zone hadn't traveled. Twilight Zone wasn't known by the Japanese people, so they had to come up with this, this sort of backstory of the explorer who brings back the artifact that now possesses the hotel. And in fact, another funny little bend on the story that Joe Rohde, the Imagineer who designed Animal Kingdom and the Adventures Club and that sort of thing, was used as the prototype for the eccentric billionaire adventurer. He was posed for the various paintings and all that. Mm-hmm. And what Joe has begun to notice is he'll be in the hallways at Imagineering, and they'll be bringing various Japanese people through to discuss new projects and that sort of thing, and they'll see Joe and say, "Oh my God, it's Harrison Hightower!" And suddenly Joe's in the hallway having to get his photo taken with all these excited Japanese executives. Because oh, I didn't know there was a real Harrison Hightower, and it's like, oh my God, my kids are going to be thrilled. But yeah, it's. I mean, there's lots of little fun stories associated with this whole project. Whether it's, for example, again, because Disney was trying to save money on its side when they were putting the first Tokyo Disneyland together, and sure. they realized they could either in fact, one of the things the Japanese insisted on right off the bat is they wanted a copy of the Mickey Mouse Revue. The original.
Yeah, from Fantasyland.
Yeah, and it was just one of these things where Disney was sort of staring down the barrel of, we have all these expenses for building Epcot, and we're not going to have to spend all this money to build, a whole second set of audio animatronic figures, and it's screw it, shut down our version and send it over there. And it's literally, it was that cold-blooded. It's just, I don't want to spend that money, particularly with staring down the barrel of completing Epcot in time for October '82. So pull that out and send that to Japan.
Wow.
But here's the thing, that they had swapped the entrance and exit for the building, and so instead of going in from the left and being loaded into the theater and then going into the right, going to the theater, and then exiting to the right, you were entering from the left. But what they did was they sent over the exact same ride film or the introductory Q movie that they used in sort of the hold area before they sent you into the theater for...
it shows everybody moving in the wrong direction. It's like, hey, here's your pre-show movie, now leave.
Mickey's like, come on, everybody, we're going to go in the theater. And the Japanese dutifully lined up and face the wall, and it's just sort of like, no, turn around, come in here. It's Mickey's confused, yeah. I mean,
they probably have to splice the film and flip Mickey around.
Well, there are all these things you don't learn until you open.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a charming park, and in fact, it's about to mutate in a huge way. The Japanese made a tour of everything that Disney had been doing over the past 6 months or so. They went out to California and did Cars Land. They came to Florida and have been walking around the new Fantasyland expansion. Mm-hmm. And right now it looks like, again, they're being the Japanese. They're cherry picking what they want. They've decided they want Cars Land. So basically, and in fact, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of a foreshadowing thing for what's eventually going to happen at the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. Because they're locked in by the harbor, they need to create space for this new 12-acre area that's going to be built in. So what they've decided to do is they're going to drain the rivers of America that go through Western Land over there.
Really?
Yep, and pull out the riverboat, and that's where Cars Land is going to be built.
It's got the same sort of color palette and the same sort of rock structure. I totally see that.
Yep, and
wow, but still, wow.
Well, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, but at the same time, I mean, that's, if you talk with folks about future plans for the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, let's face it, for example, the work that was just done for New Fantasyland, you bumped the borders of that land back as far as they can go, that they're up against the railroad track, and looking into the future. If you're looking to expand that park, there's one primo piece of real estate that, frankly, if you think about how few people per hour can experience the Mark Twain, the riverboat there.
Yeah, I mean, it's, what's the capacity? A couple hundred?
Yeah.
So maybe a few thousand, maybe 1,000 an hour?
Yeah. So now couple that with, think about if you threw a land or lands back there, what you could do because think about it. Didn't they say something to the effect of New Fantasyland allowed them to bump the numbers for the capacity for that park by 5,000? Is that right? Or I know that that's an number that I heard about, what that added for additional capacity to the park. So if you think about,
wow,
you could do back in Rivers of America thereabouts. But again, understand this is the 50-year plan, not the, we're going to do this next week. It's always a little interesting when you get to the Disney parks. You're treading on somebody's family memories.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's funny just hearing the people who complain about the, pulling out the Skyway station that had been used in decades to put in the new Hansel-themed bathroom.
we can go pee where we once made family memories. This is amazing.
That's right. That's right.
Wipe your hands, kids. Grandma loved this place. Wipe your hands.
But yeah, I mean, Tokyo Disneyland occupies such an interesting space in Disney company history. Again, there'll never be a first international, Disneyland ever again. They were the first out of the gate, and Disney learned a lot of interesting lessons on that project, and they continue to apply those lessons as that they march out around the world. And the whole notion of you have to sort of fine tune your park to be to be respectful of what foreign expectations are. What they want. That they want Disney, but they want Disney their way. And and with the Japanese, it's always been interesting to watch the mutations, whether it's Marie, the little white cat from the Aristocats, becoming a character that's hugely in demand.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I can't figure that out for the life of me. I mean, but trying figuring out why certain characters become popular with Japanese is a difficult thing to do.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, it's like when they see that opportunity, they go.
Sure.
So,
have you been over to the parks?
Not yet. In fact, I'm eyeballing. In fact, again, we need to talk about this. That when Shanghai opens in 2015, 2016, I think touring plans should do something ambitious and look at there's a lot of us who have been meaning to get to all of the parks and or at least the international parks, and it might be worth sort of eyeballing whether a bunch of us
world tour, Jim, the world tour.
Actually,
Tokyo to we looked at Tokyo to Hong Kong, and that's actually an 8-hour flight.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, when we looked at it before the earthquake, getting to Tokyo not that big of a deal, and the hotels, by the way, are pretty interesting. They have many more themed rooms than World does. But we looked at doing that and then going to do Hong Kong, but it was an 8-hour flight. Essentially, you're an entire day of travel, plus all the other time of travel to get there. But it was definitely look at it. I think that'd be fun. 2015.
2015. Well, again, just be aware that that's in-house. In fact, that I think that's part of why Iger is talking about extending, because everything I've heard is that Shanghai's opening date which was now in the latter point of 2015, seems to be sliding into 2016.
Oh, and he wants to be around for that. Or is he some sort of contractual thing that he gets a bonus if it opens?
No, I think it's.
Oh, it's his park. It's his legacy.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Wants to be there for it. But yeah, I think it would be fascinating to particularly to make that trip to compare how all of the international parks have their own subtle ways of dealing with the local culture.
I think that's a great idea. Let's start talking about that a little bit more. Have you been to Disneyland Paris yet?
Again, on the list. So,
all right. Well, we're doing a cruise. I don't know. We haven't announced this yet, but Jim and I are doing a cruise in September. We'll be talking about the DCL. So maybe we can commandeer the ship and make it as far as Gibraltar. All right. I can't wait till this is played back at our trial as evidence.
There we go.
All right.
Well, anyway. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, anyway, they've been listening to another episode of the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast with Jim L. For Jim, this is Len. Thanks very much for listening. Please rate us on iTunes. Let us know what you guys would like to hear on upcoming episodes, especially ones that don't land us in jail. For Jim, this is Len. We will see you on the next show.